Hello! Read it here. Today we're going to read a story from our /pro revenge. Now, for our first story, neighbor was stealing water from my supply, so I ruined him. I live in Asia and just purchased a new house. Now, the previous owners were family friends who needed cash urgently and haven't been living in my country for nearly 3 years. So I got it for a great price in the middle of the capital city. The sale was finalized at the start of this month, and I moved in right after. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation and the main door was locked with just a padlock, not even a door lock. The house had no gate, meaning anyone could just walk right on in. The first day I moved in, someone's bike was parked in the garage. I just parked it on the road on the same day I had a gate installed. An angry man was knocking on my gate later, and I didn't bother answering. But through my window, I could see him giving up and taking the bike after 15 minutes. So already, I wasn't digging the neighborhood. But I didn't have any incidents after that, aside from people not knowing that this was no longer an abandoned house. So my gate was blocked more often than never, but a no parking sign on my gate fixed that issue. Last week, I was having a shower in my bathroom, and I noticed my water pressure was lower than usual. I also heard my next-door neighbor's water pump going. Now this neighbor, an old guy, lived in a 3-storied house, the first being the lowest and the one he lived in. The other 2 floors were rented out to tenants. This guy wasn't happy about the house being sold and voiced many concerns to my friends, the previous owners. He was super angry about it, and my friends did warn me, but I'm a 6-foot guy with 3 dogs. No way he was doing anything, and yep, he didn't. So with this living situation, a water pump is needed to pump water to the tanks on the roof, since the public supply's pressure is not enough to get it up 3 stories. Now, I heard the water pump going and immediately was suspicious. Sure, coincidences exist, but it wouldn't hurt to check it out. I waited till his pump turned off and then turned on different taps in the house. Sure enough, the pressure was back to normal. This made me even more suspicious, but if he was stealing water, it also made sense. The water bills have been going up over the years this house wasn't lived in, but the house also had some water leaks. So it was chalked up to that, even if the bills were too high to be caused just by leaks. Now it's starting to make sense. At some point in the last 3 years, this old miser thought he'd save the cost of paying for water and waltzed into the property and is siphoning water from my lines. I couldn't find where exactly he was siphoning water from, but after checking my pressure multiple times, I was pretty sure. So I sat on it for a few days, thinking if I should confront him, go the legal path, or just let it be. Now, water in my country is very cheap. My total bill, even with washing 3 animals, a car every week, and watering my garden only costs like $5 per month, even with the neighbor also stealing some of it. But it wasn't about how much I was paying or who was paying for it. It's about entitled old people who think that they're deserving of using other people's resources without paying for it, and then getting away with it. It didn't sit right with me, and I really wanted to teach him a lesson. What I did was really simple. I just turned off my water from the mains. I wouldn't have to break into his property, nor would I be breaking any laws. It was the best way of getting back at him without needing to even lift a muscle. So on Monday, just 4 days ago, I waited till the pump flicked on and turned off the supply. Now, the way household tanks work in my country is that there's a ball valve in the tank which detects the level of water and turns on the pump. If the level doesn't increase, the valve stays open, which electronically sends a signal to the pump to stay on until the level gets to a point at which the valve closes and also shuts off the pump. However, the level wasn't increasing, and anyone knows that starving a pump of water isn't a good idea. This way, my expectation was that I'd burn out his pump and cause issues with his tenants. What I didn't account for is that his pump running constantly would mess up the fuses by constantly drawing power overnight and absolutely destroy his wiring. If he decided to upgrade his household wiring to a more modern standard, this would have been prevented. This house clearly still had 90s-era wiring. At around 3 a.m., I heard all residents in the house waking up and talking in hushed voices about why just their house in the neighborhood doesn't have power or water. I found out about the power part because the tenants devolved into shouting at their landlord. Our tenant protection laws are very important, and power and water are classed as essential even on a state level. Cutting those services are grounds for lawsuits, unless due to weather or some other unavoidable reason. In this case, The landlord is responsible for keeping the house wiring up to date and in good condition, alongside the supply of water. So the tenants were not happy, and one of them immediately moved out 2 days later when it was informed that water and power will not be returning the very same day this happened. Both tenants in the 2 floors lodged a complaint with the police. And if a person is in clear breach of laws, the police have the authority to fine or penalize the person without a court judgment. It can be challenged in court if the person thinks that they were unfairly penalized, but they still have to pay the fines and will only be refunded if and when the court finds the fines unlawful. So now, the landlord lost both tenants and has to pay a fine of $500, which is a lot of money in our country. He also has to refund the security deposits of both tenants and cannot rent out until both issues are fixed, which will cost him more money. As of right now, he's moving out on Sunday to his daughter's place since he cannot afford to live alone. The tenants were his only source of income, and he's a retired mechanic, so he has no other income. He did find out why the motor kept drawing power, overloaded the wiring, and burned out. He came by my gate and asked me if I turned off my water, and I said, "Oh yeah, my tank had a new leak on a pipe, and I turned it off till the next day until the plumber came by to fix the issue." Y'all, the look on his face. He kept a straight one, but I just knew he was holding back. He just said, "Oh, okay," and went back inside. Not sure if he knows I know, but I don't care because he can't do anything. I'm getting a plumber down next week to correct my plumbing and remove any pipes that leave my property. So I got rid of my water issue and a neighbor who could potentially be a pain in the ass by simply flicking a tap off. 2 birds, 1 stone, I'd say. TLDR, bought an abandoned house. Neighbor was siphoning water from my supply. Turned off my water supply when the motor was running. Motor burned out the wiring in the house and cut off water and power to him and his tenants. Tenants lodged police complaints and the landlord got fined, is now destitute and forced to move in with his daughter. Let's hear from the comment section. Get in close and whisper, "Hey, just so you know, I think someone in the area could be stealing water." Yeah, really? Someone goes out, hooks up their own pipes to someone else, and pumps it over to their place. Diabolical, right? You should check your pipes. Could be someone is draining your supply, and you don't even know it. I'm building a report for the police. I mean, it's criminal trespass, theft, and then the suit from the water company for stealing it. That can be seen as fraud. We got to get these guys. I feel like most people assume landlords just buy up property to rent out, in which case I'd say scum, especially if that's their only income. But there's a few ways they can get a house. Inheritance. They've lived in a place north moved, but the place still belongs to them, so they rent out. Also, they work. My uncle and aunt are landlords. They own 2 houses, both from each of the above examples. They also work. Another is a YouTuber I watched who during COVID did talk with tenants about rent. They were worried about it raising while he told them not to worry about it being late. So not scum. And I mean negative example is Prince William here in the UK, was news recently. Owns 600 properties he rents out. Most have issues like mold, water leaks. So yeah, low is scum. Coworker of mine bought a house because he was dating and looking at getting engaged, and they ended up breaking up. He'd already bought a house and fixed it up, and after a few months was like, "This is way more space than I need." So he moved into a 1-bedroom apartment and rents the house to a family. And he's been upfront that if when he ever does get married and starts a family, he'll want to move in there, since it's a great house and a great location to raise kids. He did that 5 years ago, and with property rates in our area, he's like, "I'd have already been priced out of the neighborhood, even if I was ready to move in now." Now, for our second story. If you're going to steal the catalytic converter off my truck, you should have checked if they were actually functional first. Wasn't so funny when it was turned. Was a fun morning at the beginning of last week, starting on my truck and waking everyone up at 2:45 a.m. to learn someone swiped the hollowed out cats. The idiots missed the neighbors' cameras that basically gave away who they were. It's 2 kids from the area who drive around in a pretty busted up police Crown Vic. I chose not to call the cops. Instead, I called one of my friends who's code enforcement and let him know what my plan was, and he relayed the info to the police that I was finally going to do a nuisance tow on that same Crown Victoria. The car they drive isn't street legal, as it has no license plates or insurance or working taillights and rattles like shit due to the trash sound system. They also spend their whole day at a chicken shack smoking. Not sure who they're getting money from, but I'm guessing stealing catalytic was part of the equation. When I spotted the car sitting on a quiet street, I called it in and got the go-ahead to tow. I took it straight to the police station, and they tried to run an owner check with the VIN number only to find out it hadn't been registered since 2011, and the owner was someone other than the kids who sold them the car with no title because of all the back registration owed. The cop said we can go ahead and take it to the junkyard till they can get a black title, aka certificate of destruction. By then, the two idiots were running around all over town looking for their car, thinking it got stolen by one of their friends as a prank. The key lock was so worn out you could start it with any car key. They found it at the junkyard and tried to steal it by one of them distracting the owner and the other stealing their car, but the junkyard was aware of who they were, so they cut the drive shaft off beforehand. I missed out on this part, but they got arrested for trying to steal their car back, and they watched as the junkyard used a crane to rip the car to shreds. When I saw it, the remains looked like a toddler just ripped it to the bare frame out of curiosity. They've been out of jail since, but haven't left their trailer. I did a drive-by earlier and noticed a beater Jeep Liberty in their driveway, also with no plates, and already working with the cops on taking that too. If I see it out in a public, except I won't miss the show next time. Let's hear from the comment section. Hey, can't be charged since they no longer have the CAT converters on them. While there is video proof, that alone is normally not enough for a prosecutor to want to go ahead with a trial, as it is not considered strong enough evidence. If the cops could grab them before they got rid of the stolen goods, it would be easier. Also, depending on the video, it could be too blurry to be 100% proof it is them, but enough proof for people in the area to know it is probably them. Basically, enough for OP, but not enough for a trial. By OP going after the vehicles they are illegally driving, it is one of the few ways the cops can deal with them for now. Also, I am not a lawyer. I learned what I know through people having similar issues with their converters being stolen. So there might be more going on, and if there is someone who knows more or sees something I might have gotten wrong, please correct me. You're on the right tracks. The burden of proof in criminal case is guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. That's a good and noble standard. See the recent death penalty case controversy for a prime example on why we need this burden of proof. Unfortunately, some people are smart enough to keep themselves in a gray enough area where it would be hard for a prosecutor to prosecute them. And if the prosecutor does try, they have to spend so much time and effort that it lets more serious stuff fall by the wayside. The severity of theft should also consider the non-financial value of the items. Some of the things that are commonly stolen force the victim to lose days on getting replacements. Losing a phone often means you lose invaluable data/memories as well. It really doesn't make sense that stealing from individuals seems to be treated the same as petty theft from shops. While I agree in principle, the devil is in the details. What kind of compensation can the court order to be repaid? We've already established that the value of the damages would be non-financial, and the court can really only order financial restitution or public service/jail time, which would not be of direct financial value to the damaged party. So how do you place a financial value on things like lost time, precious memories lost, inconvenience caused? Trying to assign a monetary value to these things at best would lead to courts simply assigning an arbitrary value per non-financial damage. Imagine being told by a court that those lost pictures of your kids as babies was only worth $100. How would that feel? At worst, it would let the judges arbitrarily decide how much they think these damages would be worth, which could vary wildly depending on the judge or the defendant. Imagine some racist puppet judge issuing massive restitution for black defendants versus slaps on the wrist for white defendants. Now, for our third story. Cheat on your wife with mine, I will burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our two kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young they couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself. But since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar. So I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew some shit was going on. Then one day I sat down at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her AOL password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF where they discussed how my wife was regularly fucking one of her ex-BFs from high school. No mention of details about him other than my wife, also talking shit about his wife, making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times, /dates, /locations, all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go meet this guy for lunch, then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely fucked mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly. Lots of fighting in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kid's mom and is important to them. Nothing beyond that. Let's hear from the comments section. Well played. Even if I don't get how you can have more anger to the guy than to your wife. And OP replied back, I was definitely angry with my wife, and don't get me wrong, I made her suffer throughout the divorce. For example, she wanted to try couples therapy, and I agreed. Not because I thought there was a path to reconciliation, but because it felt good to lay out exactly how I felt about what she'd done. How disgusted, disappointed, and angry I was with her. She always left those appointments in tears and would sit bawling in her car for a while before pulling herself together. Eventually, she realized that it was already over for us and canceled the remaining appointments. I also had to think about what was best for the kids. I wasn't going to bring the chaos I experienced into their lives where I saw my parents screaming at each other, my dad calling my mom a whore, and worse and vice versa. It was in their best interest to make things go smoothly. I've never told them the details of what happened between their mom and me, and I probably never will. I don't know what she's told them about it, but I still have Ron's report stashed away in case they need to see the truth. Also, I wasn't really angry with Bob for my own sake. I was angry with him on behalf of his wife. I felt like she deserved to at least know what was going on, and what she chose to do about it was up to her. Bob's consequences are due to his wife's, and probably her dad's, rage at what he'd done. I just lit the fuse. Your story is so unfortunately familiar to me. My dad was cheating on my mom with a lady who worked in his company's main office. He was tradesman and she worked in a local hall. Her husband, however, was very well-to-do. I wouldn't say that he's in the top 1%, but he has plenty of money. He owns a few restaurants and whatnot. He got suspicious of his wife and hired a private investigator, who quickly turned up photos of my dad and his wife. He got my mom's info. This was the early 80s too, so his PI had to do a ton of legwork, so he called my mom up and invited her to one of his restaurants to talk. He showed her the photos to cue my mom into what was going on. Needless to say, everyone got divorced. My dad and his affair partner are now married for 20 plus years. And 12-year-old me didn't know what was going on. I thought we were a happy family. Both of my parents were excellent parents and providers. My little brother and sister all got along. Then bam, daddy's gone and mommy is pissed all the time. I've come to terms with it, but I don't think my brother and sister have any. It's been over 30 years since it happened. Pretty crazy how that affects people. That's why I made a promise to myself to never be unfaithful to anyone. Now, for our fourth story. Tricking my slacker co-worker into sabotaging himself. I work in an office with a guy I'll call Seth. Seth is that co-worker everyone knows. Lazy, always passing his work on to someone else, and somehow always getting away with it. He'll sit around on his phone or go to the bathroom every 10 minutes. He's the kind of guy who will show up late, make some lame excuse about traffic, and then disappear for lunch for 2 hours. For the past 6 months, Seth's favorite target has been me. He'll send emails asking if I can help out with a project, but what he really means is do all the work while I take the credit. I complained to my boss a couple of times, but somehow Seth always managed to weasel his way out of trouble. The final straw came when he passed off a major report that was due to a client in 2 days, dumping it on me last minute. One day, I casually asked him if he was good with Excel, and he admitted he didn't know much about it. Perfect. The next time Seth tried to dump a bunch of spreadsheets on me to organize for his next report, I agreed. But this time, I embedded a series of hidden formulas into the documents. These formulas didn't do anything important, just enough to mess with the numbers if someone didn't know how to check for hidden cells. It took me a little time, but I was careful not to make it too obvious. The kicker? Every time Seth tried to copy and paste the data into his report, it would scramble everything just enough to be completely useless. On the day the report was due, Seth slacked off like usual, assuming I had handled it like always. When the client called, furious because the report was filled with nonsense numbers, Seth panicked. He rushed to fix it, but every time he tried to fix one part of the report, something else would break. He came to me, frantic, and asked for help. I acted confused and said, "Oh, I don't know what happened. Maybe it's a glitch." I gave him some vague advice and watched as he spent the entire day trying to salvage his mess. Our boss found out, and for once, Seth couldn't talk his way out of it. He got lambasted for screwing up such an important project and was put on temporary leave without pay. I guess he'll be doing his own work from now on. Let's hear from the comment section. That happened to me. Y2K panic lead to a new computer program to replace a highly specialized system for a main client. So the idiots decided that this client no longer needed specialized software. This doubled my workload. Then they decided since we have this shiny new software, they can reorganize the department and not replace the 2 other data processors who were leaving. So let's add this up. My workload doubles, and then I get the work of 2 other people added on top of this. My newly promoted supervisor comes to me and asks me why none of the paperwork has been filed. I explained that I was already working 12 hours days, 7 days a week to keep our main client happy, and that with the extra work given to me, I didn't have time to file everything as well. So she took all the filing. 2 weeks later, she brings it all back and adds it to my new stack. Tells me I need to get the filing done. So I asked her what is my priority? All I got was it is all the priority. I said no, I need to know what my priority needs to be because I'm already killing myself for this job, and this will mean I have to sleep here too. She refused to give me the priority, so instead I gave her my 2 week. One of my ex-coworkers called me 2 months later laughing. Said supervisor was fired and my job had been split into 4 positions along with IT being read the riot act for not customizing the software for our main multi-billion-dollar client. Reminds me of a story I heard Dave Ramsey tell from early on in his business. He had an admin assistant that was repeatedly being given too much work, but they didn't want people working overtime. She came to him and said, "You have a problem. I have 60 hours of work and only 40 hours. It blows my mind when managers just constantly dump work onto people, but don't give them a priority or get extra help. I'm sorry, but this isn't my company. I'll give you my all when I'm here, and I'll even work a little over, but not as a way of life and not at the cost of my mental health and well-being. I used to have a boss that would nicely guilt-trip me to rush back to work when I had been sick or had a family issue come up. She really needed me there. I made some good money and learned a lot at that job. I eventually left and started my own thing because I got tired of not being able to tell pain-in-the-ass customers to buzz off or come back to reality with their expectations. Ironically, I still do work for that company, but it's as a subcontractor, and I set my own schedule and take the jobs I want. And when the customers get too needy, I get to charge extra for all the trips/wasted time. I did something very similar to this around 2007. It was all verbal, which was wiser than not my manager. His nickname around the office was the bus driver because he liked to throw people under the bus. Bus driver asked me to work on something. I told him no problem, but I need to check with my boss first. He said he didn't want to bother my boss. Wrong answer, chump. I went straight to the boss and told him all about it. When it happened a second time, and I went to the boss, he kidded me about, "Hey, what are you doing working on his stuff?" I knew he was kidding, but I still was a little defensive and said that's why I brought it to your attention. He was a Northeasterner like me, so I knew he was just wanting to break balls and fun. I'm an old corporate vulture, but when I was a little hatchling trying to scavenge my way up the ladder, my mentor told me something that really stuck. Learn how to say no. People are always going to try and foist off their work on you. And if there's no way of avoiding it, make sure to do a really shit job. It's their delivery. They get to eat the consequences. Words of wisdom that shielded me from a lot of do work throughout the decades. And kudos on the Excel work. It's fun to be always slightly better than your peers at it because of things like this. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more.